Now, the convention today is titled The Architecture for Growth. And I think that is a very appropriate title because of what we are embarked on right now. I'm reminded of last year when we had the first India Economic Convention, when we were very fortunate to have the Honorable Finance Minister, then he was the leader of the opposition in the Rajya Sabha, and the Honorable Prime Minister, then he was of course the BJP's candidate for Prime Minister, address the gathering at that point. And they laid out, I think, a vision for India and for India's economic growth that we have consistently followed through on. And we've consistently followed through in the party manifesto that was released for the Lok Sabha elections in March, April, May of last year, in the budget of July 2014, which the Honorable Finance Minister presented, in all of the public discussions that we had thereafter, and then of course in the budget that we presented in February of this year. And if I were to describe that architecture, that economic architecture, or the approach that we have taken as far as economic policy making is concerned, I would try and group it into three big categories. The first is, what is the overall objective? What type of economic growth are we trying to pursue? Number two, what are the economic principles that we are following? And then number three, what are some of the signature big ticket reform initiatives that are underway, some of which have already taken, I think, very good shape and are moving forward very successfully, and then two or three others that are in the process of really taking shape and being implemented. So those are the three areas I'll touch on. But let me first start with what is the overall objective? How are we thinking about economic growth in India? And how is that different from what has happened in the past? I think we can characterize our economic philosophy as one of building India's productive capacity. We want to build India's productive capacity so that we can sustain 8 to 10% non-inflationary GDP growth rate, not just for a few years, which is what has been India's destiny in the last few decades, but to be able to achieve that 8 to 10% growth steadily through boom and bust cycles. And in fact, if you look at China, that is what China has been able to achieve over 3 decades, growth of over 9% across 3 decades, which has really enabled them to be able to deliver a much better life for their citizens. So we need to be able to build India's productive capacity so we can sustain those high growth rates. And to be able to do that, we have to build up India's hard assets and soft assets. The hard assets are, of course, our infrastructure, our roads, our bridges, our ports, our power plants, our factories, all of the hard assets that are necessary to build up our infrastructure. But it's also about our soft assets, the employability and the skills of our people, our institutions, and our innovation ecosystem. We have to build up our soft assets as well. And this approach that we have of building up India's productive capacity so that we don't have the supply side bottlenecks that have stymied our growth in the past, this approach I would characterize as being an approach that is much more supply side oriented, much more investment driven than the approach of the previous government. The approach of the previous government I would characterize at least as being much more demand side oriented and much more consumption driven. So we have a very different economic philosophy when we think about economic growth for India. Now, as we think of building India's productive capacity, the hard assets and the soft assets, what are the economic principles that we are following? As the Honorable Prime Minister has said, and the Honorable Finance Minister have said many times, we are a government that believes in Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas. We are a pro-poor government. And no government in India can be anything else because we are still a very poor country. We have hundreds of millions of people living in extreme poverty. And so our first and most important purpose has to be able to help the poor. So we are a pro-poor government, and most of our policies are intended to be able to provide a better quality of life to our poor people. Ladies and gentlemen, because we are a pro-poor government, we are also a pro-market government. Because we are a pro-poor government, we are also a pro-market government. And in fact, there is no other way to serve the poor than to ensure that our economy grows and prospers and flourishes and adds jobs. So we are both a pro-poor government and a pro-market government. And the Honorable Finance Minister has said many times that it is a false trade-off to say that if you're a pro-poor government, you're not a pro-market, pro-business government. So those are two of our very important principles, pro-poor and pro-market, pro-poor, in terms of the policy making that we do. The third principle that I think is very important for us is to say that we are a government that believes in empowerment, not entitlement. We believe in empowerment, not entitlement. And if you look at some of our important initiatives, whether it is Jan Dhan, whether it's irrigation and so on, you'll see that our goal is to be able to provide our people with the resources, the opportunities, the tools, so that they can make a better life for themselves. Because we think that is the way in which we can provide them dignity and a way of generating a better life for themselves. We have to provide them those tools and opportunities. So we are a government that focuses on empowerment, not entitlement. The fourth very important principle that we follow is one of minimum government, maximum governance. Minimum government, maximum governance. And the idea of maximum governance is to be able to put in place a rules-driven, policy-based state with minimum discretion. And for all of you as business people, the fact that we want to have a rules-driven state bound by law and order, where there is as little discretion as possible, will be, I think, very reassuring. Because we want corruption, we want discretion to be taken out of the system so that you have a fair, simple and predictable policy regime, taxation regime that tells you with a high degree of certainty what to expect. So that is our fourth very important principle that we follow. And then the fifth principle that we put into practice also is around cooperative federalism. Cooperative federalism. We think that India's 29 states are responsible partners in progress with the central government. And it is our job to be able to provide them with the resources, the best practices, the support, the policies that will enable them to flourish. Because as the Honorable Prime Minister said, unless we make these states the pillars of our progress, we cannot move forward. So cooperative federalism, which also can become competitive federalism as the states try to do better and attract investment, is a very foundational principle for us. Now, with that as the overall objective, to build up India's productive capacity, and these as our important economic principles, we have launched a series of signature reforms or missions. When Mr. Mittal spoke, he mentioned some of them. I'll just highlight a few, and I can tell you these are the ones that are already making a real difference on the ground. And then there are 2 or 3 others that we are working on right now. So I'll list those, and then I'll end my statements because the Honorable Finance Minister is here, and I'm sure you all want to hear from him as well. But the 4 or 5 things that we have already launched that are making a real difference on the ground. Number 1 is Jan Dhan, which is going to be translated into a platform for universal social security, which the Honorable Finance Minister had spoken about in his budget. So that's a very, very important initiative of ours that we think is truly going to be transformational, because we are going to put in place universal social security in India. Number 2, we are very focused on jobs. And what we're doing in Make in India and Skill India is really to be able to provide jobs for our young people, as Mr. Mittal described. Number 3, we are focused on agriculture. And in agriculture, what we're doing in irrigation, the soil health card, coming up with a more efficient fertilizer subsidy scheme. In agriculture, we are taking great steps forward. And then the final thing that I will say is what we are doing in terms of public investment in roads, in railways, in ports, and so on. We have ramped up public investment in this budget. Already, if you look at the numbers, you'll see that public investment this year is running 39-40% higher than last year. So this is already a reform measure, an initiative that is making a big difference on the ground. And then finally, what I think we have achieved in the last year or 18 months in terms of macro stabilization, the turnaround in the macro economy, I think is a great achievement for what we've been doing. Now we have many other important initiatives that are still in process. These include GST, which you know all about. These include what we're doing as with respect to banking reforms, NPAs, and so on. So we've got, I think, a whole host of big ticket reform measures that are going to have a tremendous impact on India's economy, on India's future, and those are the ones that we are embarked on right now. I welcome ideas and suggestions from all of you. You have great experiences from what you have seen around the world and what you think can benefit India. And so in the panel discussion that we will have later on, I'd love to be able to engage with all of you and understand from you what we could do better. But once again, thank you very much for being here this morning. It's great to have you all here, and we very much look forward to having the Honorable Finance Minister tell us about his thoughts with respect to the architecture for growth. Thank you very, very much.